Hello, everybody. I'm your host, John Piper. Welcome, TSA members, professional truckers, and everyone tuned in today for another episode of The Road Home, powered by the Truckers Service Association. Thanks for driving safe. Hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving holiday, and if you were out delivering some freight during the break, we certainly appreciate you. On this month's podcast, we hear from member Jezebel Sannino, a professional driver out of northern Arizona that shares some insight from the road. I talk with Steve Wilhelms, who shares with us how to potentially avoid a $2,500 fine if you don't log into the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse by January 5th to run your first required query due to a new rule that took effect this year, so do it today. And Dan Cook, a 30-plus year veteran of the insurance industry, discusses nuclear verdicts and what you can do to reduce your exposure. If you like what we are doing, I'd appreciate it if you would subscribe to the podcast, share it with a fellow driver, and give us a review on Apple Podcasts. And now for another episode of The Road Home. Welcome to another segment of The Road Home, powered by the Truckers Service Association. I'm John Piper, your host, and pleased to be joined by a TSA member from Northern Nevada. Welcome, professional driver Jezebel Sannino, to the show. How you doing?
Hi, John. Good morning. Doing well, thank you.
Well, hey, I always enjoy talking to drivers, whether I'm at a trade show, which unfortunately, due to COVID, we haven't had many of those lately. But anytime I can connect with a professional driver, because you all are the ones that really make the world go round. And I just want to, and I say it a lot on the show, Jezebel, but hey, I applaud you. I appreciate you. And thank you for all you do for the trucking industry.
Yeah, well, God bless you, John. Thank you. That really means a lot.
Well, we've had a chance to get to know each other the last few days, and you got a great story. You live on a nice little piece of heaven out there in northern Nevada on a little ranch, and you're an independent contractor, so you run your own business. You've been driving for 15 years, and now leased on with River Dog Express, pulling dry freight primarily. How's it been lately for you, Jezebel? I know when COVID first hit, the freight market was really bad, but I think it's been pretty solid the last few months.
Yeah, it really has, and I'm definitely noticing a lot of the freight going up. I know we're coming into the holidays, so we've got turkeys, Christmas trees, which are going to really help a lot. When the COVID first hit, there was freight down to 60 cents a mile, and being an owner-operator, it's a little hard to survive on that. But I am real excited. Freight is definitely starting to move up a little bit. I run a lot of coast-to-coast, so that really works for me.
Well, hey, I know we won't mention numbers, but the load you're getting ready to pick up tomorrow pays substantially more than 60 cents a mile. And that's great news right here before the holidays. River Dog Express is going to generate some nice cash flow on that load, right?
Yeah, I'm real excited about that. That was just a complete blessing. You betcha. It's almost like one of those dream loads. Only 6,000 pounds heading to Georgia, over $3 a mile. Yeah, this is going to be a nice little load. Great way to start the holidays out. Well,
that's awesome. And thanks for sharing that, because that might encourage some other, independent contractors that haven't been quite as fortunate, Jezebel, to know that, hey, things are picking up and you can still finish this 2020 year on a positive note. And hey, speaking of finding freight, a lot of our members are leased onto very large fleets and get, dispatch and loads directly from their core carrier they're leased onto. But you were telling me you love the challenge of just finding your own freight, typically on the load board or through some referral connections you have. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I do. I like to run the spot market, and pretty much what I do is, first off, I pull up the weather. And obviously, when the weather starts making a turn for the worse, I'm following that sunshine. So I'll just kind of check out the weather, and then I use what they call the DAT board, DAT. And I've been very successful with that. You could do future searches. You can do a search for right now at the moment. But I can just kind of venture out. I can see what lanes are paying, what's hot. And then I just kind of take it from there. If there's a particular area that I want to go into, I can pull up a week ahead of time and just see what kind of freight's coming in and out of there. And that's pretty much how I get the loads, and I've been very successful at it. Every now and then you got to play a little hopscotch, and you got to take that bad load in order to get that good load. But I managed to get all the way to the East Coast and back pretty successfully week after week. So it definitely works for me.
Hey, I love that term, hopscotch. You gotta bounce around, not necessarily go to places or land on a block in hopscotch that you want to land on, but to get to where you want to end up. And that runs true in life. Sometimes you got to take a few detours to get to where you want to go. So that's a great great segue into. Hey, we've had some segments on here before, Jezebel, where we talk about truck maintenance, and I know you're running a 2012 Freightliner. Truck's been really good to you, but talk to us a little bit about the challenges, being an independent contractor, the maintenance on that truck and the protecting, expenditures and how you manage that.
Yeah, and it seems like no matter how much time, money you put into it and you do that preventive maintenance, something always happens. So yeah, I run a 2012. It's got a Detroit DD15 in it, and we're running a little over 918,000 miles. And she's been pretty good to me. I get my oil changed about every 15 to 20,000 miles. Kevin Rutherford, really says, you got to stay. That's like the lifeline to my truck. So I think that's one of the biggest things I do. I had an in-frame done back in February. And I think the biggest thing for an owner-operator, I didn't have $20,000 sitting in the bank to cover that. So that was a real big challenge. But also a huge learning lesson, because after that happened, I made sure to set aside, even if it was $10 out of every settlement, $50 out of every settlement, and just slowly start building that reserve account. So when and if something, it's not when, it's a matter, it's going to happen, is making sure you got a little bit there. I've been real fortunate. I've got a really great mechanic in Georgia. So whenever I need major motor work or anything like that, I try to get out there. But yeah, I can't stress enough just coming into the cold seasons, getting ready for winter, double checking your airlines, hoses, they could tend to freeze up, especially when one day it's 20 degrees, the next day it's 80 degrees. That can really take a toll on a truck. So just really making sure all those nuts, bolts are tight, the seat clamps are down tight, and just really staying on top of it.
Well, Jezebel, one of the core benefits of the TSA member programs is our insurance program, and you've been on part of that for over 3 years now. Tell the listeners and the folks that may be thinking about joining TSA how that experience has been for you. And we know insurance costs just keep going up and up and up with these nuclear verdicts. So to be able to have the buying power of TSA and the 12,000 members strong, I'm sure that's been important to you.
It's been real important. When I first joined up with TSA, I was really surprised how inexpensive they were compared to some of these other companies out there. I've been very fortunate, and I've never had to file a claim with them. But I can tell you, they've really done me good. They've really broke things down in layman terms. They're not selling me insurance that I really don't need. And I think one of the huge, when COVID first hit, and the market took a dump, I, along with many others, we were struggling. And when the finances got hard and I gave them a call and said, hey, is there anything you can do? They worked with me. And that in itself was amazing, because it just relieved so much stress. I can focus on doing my job and know that my insurance is there, knowing that I'm going to be okay. So having that little support team behind me really made a big difference.
And we were just talking off air. There's so many other member benefits that you just kind of found out about just yesterday, and you've been a member for 3 years. So I would encourage all members to go to the TSA website and learn, because we're adding new member services all the time, just as a resource to the 12,000 plus members. So, man, that's great to hear. A great testimonial of your experience here with the TSA.
Yeah, it's really great. And not just that, you guys do cover a lot of other topics, like the new hours of service rule changes. So you guys went into depth about that. You guys do give a lot of little trucker tips and tricks on your website. That's really nice. Good reading.
Well, hey, as we record this, we're heading right into the holiday season. It's hard to believe, heading right into the Thanksgiving week next week.
It's just like yesterday.
And this will air probably the first week in December. So now, you just mentioned to everybody you're taking a load and you're headed to Georgia. So there's a good chance that you won't be home for the holidays, or at least for Thanksgiving. When you're on the road for the holidays, I know your husband, your family members, they understand it because you come from a family of truckers. But do you try to have a traditional Thanksgiving meal while you're on the road with maybe some other truckers, or what are your plans for next week for your holiday meal?
Yeah, kind of funny. So we call it a day of thanks. And being that I'm not going to be home for Thanksgiving, we just had our Thanksgiving last Thursday. And we just kind of acted as if, and one of my favorite traditions is to watch the movie, the full-length 6-hour version of Gone with the Wind. So my family was pretty amazing, and we just pretended and acted as if, and we played Gone with the Wind all day, and we had the full turkey and the trimmings and a little extra, and we just kind of sat around that table and gave thanks for what we've got in our lives today. And then when next week rolls around, who knows where I'll be. I'll still be very thankful, and who knows, maybe I'll have my own little turkey dinner or my little Thanksgiving dinner here in the truck. I'm vegan, so I do what they call a toki, which is like a tofu turkey. But it definitely fills that void, and I'm very grateful for it. And that's probably what I'll do.
Hey, I love that, a day of thanks. We do have so much to be thankful for, Jezebel, and that's a great reminder. You mentioned being a vegan. I know you tuned into one of our recent podcasts and heard Nick Cool giving some health and wellness tips. Anything that you can share with the audience that helps you stay a little healthier on the road, as far as exercise, wellness, and your nutrition?
Actually, I do. I am vegan, and I am very healthy. I start every morning with a good protein shake, do my 2 cups of coffee. I drink a lot of teas, and I think as far as making this lifestyle change, and that's what it was I picked one thing in my life that caused me grief, and I noticed that dairy caused inflammation, swelling in the feet. And when I eliminated dairy out of my life, I was so blown away with how much better I was feeling. I also play guitar, so I noticed when I cut dairy out of my life, the inflammation went away in my fingers, and I felt so amazing. It's like, all right, well, we got rid of dairy. What next? So then I went to a completely low sodium diet, and it's really made a change in my life. In my truck, I have just all kinds of like dried fruits. I got protein powders. I take about a half a dozen mason jars before I hit the road, and I fill them up with dried fruit and oatmeal. And I do oatmeal every morning. You can do it right there at the truck stop, get your water. And then when those jars are empty, I'll fill them up with like wild rice and quinoa. And I'll do a lot of that, very high in protein. And just really try to keep it healthy, stay away from the donuts. And I just know that when I'm eating healthy, I sleep better, and sleep is so important for us out here. So when I'm eating healthy, I'm sleeping better. I wake up with a better attitude, and I'm ready to hit the road. So those are just some of the little things I do, but it's so important. Like I said, I start my morning every morning with a protein drink and my oatmeal, and then that works. That'll get me through till late afternoon, and we'll do a soup. Or like I said, I cook in my truck, so I do a lot of sweet potatoes and black beans. And just really try to keep it healthy so I can stay healthy and for my family when I get home.
Some great knowledge. That was kind of a drop the mic moment. So, hey, I want to thank Jezebel Sannino from River Dog Express for dialing in on this segment of The Road Home. Hey, thank you so much, and be safe out there, Jezebel.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, John, and God bless everybody, and happy holidays, and let's keep that rubber side down and be safe out there.
Welcome back to The Road Home, powered by the Truckers Service Association. I'm pleased to be joined by a regular contributor to The Road Home, Steve Wilhelms has more than 25 years in law enforcement and safety in the trucking industry. Welcome back, Steve.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it. Glad to join you again.
Man, a lot of exciting things happening in the trucking industry as we record. It's Thanksgiving week, so I want to give thanks to all the drivers out there and for you and your family as well, Steve.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. It has been a tough year, but the drivers are getting the recognition that they have long deserved, long overdue. So it's good to see that, and hope we can keep that up as we go into 2021.
Well, drivers, you want to pay attention here. We're going to talk about some deadlines that can impact all the CDL holders out there and could cost a driver up to $2,500. Now, Steve, the drivers are doing pretty well right now, but $2,500, that's a pretty large sum for a driver to be fined.
Well, it is, and it's a pretty good chunk out of anybody's pocket, right, given everything that's gone on this year. So, yeah, a little bit of attention to detail can keep that from happening.
And what we're talking about is the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse system. There's some requirements to get registered and do some things by January the 5th. And one thing we want to encourage, Steve's going to share a lot of great information, but go ahead and do that as soon as possible. Steve, earlier this year, matter of fact, January of 2020, when the system was taking on a lot of inbound activity, it crashed and was really down for several weeks. So we want to encourage everyone to not wait till the last minute and get this thing done. Get it off your to-do list and start the new year right.
Absolutely, especially with the limited queries that you're required to run. And there still have been a lot of motor carriers that have not registered for access to the clearinghouse. So if you've not done that yet, you can't do anything in the clearinghouse, whether it's limited or full query. So we would encourage you to do that.
And we'll put some, in the podcast notes, we'll put some links and some information, some instructions on how to do that. Because, anytime you're doing something with a government entity, it can get a little confusing. Isn't that right, Steve?
Yeah, that's about an understatement. Yeah, it can get very confusing. So, even, the simple fact that, they designate a commercial motor vehicle and the regulations is two different things. One is 10 to 26 and the other one is, 26,000 and over. So it just depends on where you look.
Well, Steve, there are some differences for what is required from an existing driver versus a new hire for motor carriers. What are some of the differences required in the system?
Well, beginning on January 6th of 2020, any new hire that was coming on to your company had to first register to have their own account and have access to the portal. They had to register themselves in the clearinghouse portal. And then they had to give consent to the motor carrier to run their full query. Now, fast forward a year, and the motor carrier, it's time to run all CDL holders, either employed or leased to that motor carrier, through the clearinghouse. So while you didn't run, may not have run it on your whole fleet to begin with, just new hires from January to now, now it's time to run everybody in the fleet that possesses a CDL.
Steve, a couple of things we were talking about there are really eye-opening for me, with more and more states legalizing marijuana, medical marijuana on the rise, some of the vaping products that have CBD oil, and, the strength of some of those products are much stronger than they were back in the 70s or 80s. What's some of the insight that you can share with the professional drivers out there on maybe some gotchas or things to think about related to drug and alcohol use?
Yeah, so John, the first few months of the clearinghouse, or let's say almost the first year of the clearinghouse, has revealed an overabundance of marijuana positives, probably 3 to 5 to 1 anything else. It's just kind of off the chart compared to any other drug, and that's because, like you mentioned, the potency of THC is a lot stronger now than it was 8 to 10 years ago for various reasons. But second behind that, in what we found on these full queries in the first year the clearinghouse has been open, is cocaine, and then third is kind of a tie between methamphetamine and amphetamine. So there are some, there's some things that you should obviously stay away from if you are, driving under a CDL, and the FMCSA has still not said, hey, either medical marijuana, or if you live in a state that has legalized recreational use, that you can drive a CDL required vehicle. So the biggest problem that we see is people will vape CBD oil or take CBD oil, and there is no regulation on what amount of THC, what gets you high in marijuana, right? There's no regulation. That industry is not very tightly regulated. And so we see a lot of CBD oil induced into with higher levels of THC. So while you might be just trying to clear up your arthritis or your sore knee or your sore back, you really should be staying away from the vaping and the CBD oil.
That is some fantastic insight, and just another reason to tune in to the Road Home each and every month for some of that insight into making your life better and really staying out of trouble. I mean, if you're not able to drive professionally, I mean, that we talk about a $2,500 fine, but boy, that could really cause the independent contractor a lot of income. Steve, is there any cost associated with running these queries in the clearinghouse?
Sure, it's $1.25 per query, whether that's a full query upon pre-hire or whether that's a limited query. And then there's different purchase plans that are available for fleets that there's an unlimited plan. There's a couple of other bundles that are customized to meet your needs. And then and some of those never expire. So you can purchase a bundle and then purchase more as needed. But it's $1.25 sort of flat rate, whether it's a limited query or a full query.
Well, Steve, this has been fantastic. In wrapping up, any other advice you can share with the TSA members, the professional drivers out there that can help them during this process?
Yeah, just a couple of things to clarify, because there has been a lot of confusion on this. And that is, if I'm an independent owner operator, I have my own authority, that you are required to register for the clearinghouse. You're not leased on to somebody else, but you're required to register for the clearinghouse. So true owner operators, that employ themselves, so to speak, right, and have a CDL have to follow the guidelines of the clearinghouse. However, to make it a little bit easier for them, in the regulation itself, it actually tells the owner operator to do that. It's a lot easier to join a consortium or what they call a CTPA, because that's who is going to, report on the driver having a positive and help that driver work through remedying the system. And so that's one of the things that I like to say. And for those of you who have fleets, the biggest thing about it is don't wait until December, the end of December, to run your limited query. If you'll remember back to, when the clearinghouse first opened, there were, about a month plus where you didn't know if it, worked, their portal worked or not. It would crash because of the heavy use. And that's, what we're anticipating. What the industry's anticipating. FMCSA may tell you something else, but it's what the industry's anticipating on this mass run of limited queries. So if you haven't done it, go ahead and do it. and instead of having to deal with all of the ups and downs of the system being accessible or not accessible, when you've got major motor carriers of fleets of 10,000 plus decide to, three of them just decide randomly to run their limited queries at the same time. And we know that the bandwidth is probably not that great to be able to handle that.
Well, Steve, thank you so much for hopping on the road home today. I appreciate all your insight, and I know you'll impact several drivers today, and thank you so much. Have a great holiday. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the fact that you had me on.
We've got a special guest today that's going to give you some insight into the transportation risk space, which I know that you're all concerned about, rising insurance rates, how to be safer, how to make sure you get home safely to your loved ones. I'd like to welcome to the show Dan Cook. How are you, sir?
Doing well, thank you. Appreciate you having me.
Well, man, we were talking pre-show, 31 years in the risk. Has that always been transportation risk focused?
Predominantly. The last 20 or so have been exclusively transportation, but I worked with very large fleets very early in my career.
Well, Dan, a lot of folks, I live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. You're in Florida. You travel the country. Hey, no secret, every time we turn the TV on now or see billboards, it's about that nuclear verdict. We hear about it. It makes the national news when there's a big tractor involved in an accident, and everybody wants to kind of point finger at the big truck initially. We both know that the safest drivers on the road are professional truckers. I mean, statistically, year in, year out, very safe. So proud of being part of this industry. But unfortunately, nuclear verdicts have become a big issue. And I know that's a kind of a crazy term, nuclear verdict, but can you share a little bit what a nuclear verdict is?
You bet. And I will tell you, I couldn't agree more. The truck drivers are the heart of our industry. And I know many truck drivers. My father-in-law was a long-haul truck driver. I grew up in and around the business. And these professionals want to get home and get home safely. And there's a lot to be proud about with regard to the drivers in this industry. And unfortunately, the plaintiffs' bar has taken direct aim on our industry, on the employers that create trucking jobs, and unfortunately on the drivers. And when I started in this industry 31 years ago, I think I could clearly say that a nuclear verdict was anything over $1 million. It was rare that we saw claims get above $1 million. And now, the Atri study that just came out and a lot of the benchmarking stuff that I looked at sets the threshold for nuclear, if you will, at $10 million. And it's really hard to fathom as someone that's been in the business as long as I have, that there would be enough claims above $10 million to actually have a threshold. But here we are.
Well, Dan, how often, I know you follow these verdicts closely, being in the insurance and risk space. How often, I mean, 10 million and above, man, that is a lot of money. And we get it. When there is a catastrophic accident, there are a lot of costs associated with it, especially with the loss of life. How often are nuclear verdicts happening here in the U.S.?
Well, John, there was a study from 2011 to 16. There were a total over those 6 years of 24 nuclear verdicts. So that was an average of one every 3 months. But since then, we're averaging at least once a month. And that number, that is verdicts where we know the dollar amount. That number does not include the numerous large settlements that are sealed for amounts that we don't know. So based on, my insight, working with many of the large trucking companies around the country and the reinsurance industry, it would not surprise me at all if right now we're averaging 2 nuclear-sized verdicts in excess of $10 million a month.
Well, Dan, you mentioned ATRI, that's the American Transportation Research Institute. I know they're actively engaged in studying this. You know, that they are a nonprofit. Matter of fact, I was on a webinar just recently, very informative about safety. And what are some of the things that ATRI is studying to maybe help reduce some of these nuclear verdicts?
Well, you know, ATRI just published probably the industry's leading study on this topic. They studied 641, I believe, large verdicts and published a report called Understanding the Impact of Nuclear Verdicts on the Trucking Industry, I believe. And that's a free report. So listeners are able to go to ATRI's website and can actually download that report. And in that report, it identifies the situations that lead to larger verdicts and provides a bit of a white paper for fleets of all sizes to really look at what they can be doing to lessen the likelihood that they're involved in one of these nuclear verdicts.
I'll put that in the show notes as well, Dan. You know, in the podcast, we put links to resources. That sounds like a great resource for listeners to go back and check out.
It is, John. In fact, there's going to be, I don't know the exact name of it, but there's going to be a follow-up study that specifically talks about the impact on small fleets in the not distant future.
Well, you mentioned, you know, the increase in payouts, you know, the outlays, the nuclear verdicts. But in addition to that, Dan, there's, you know, every claim has increased due to various reasons, you know, just the cost of equipment and insurance and medical bills and on and on and on. If these are happening so often, how healthy is the insurance industry? And do we have to worry about any insurance companies going out of business?
Well, yeah, it is true. I will tell you, the insurance industry has gotten hammered. And particularly, you know, for our listening audience, the U.S. commercial property casualty insurance companies, that includes all of the companies that provide auto liability and umbrellas to small fleet, just got smoked in the first half of 2020. They saw their net income drop by 26%. And listen to this number, the property casualty industry lost $82.8 billion in surplus. That's cash on the balance sheets in the first quarter of 2020. So this is drop dead serious, and it is the result of that you're really seeing the hard insurance market environment and the reduced capacity. You know, that said, the industry as a whole is very stable. There is still over $650 billion in surplus sitting in those insurance companies. And the system on a macro level does a great job of dissipating or spreading risk around in a way that no one properly structured insurance company is at great risk. You will see, however, small risk retention groups, small insurance companies that just don't have the balance sheets fail or merge or be acquired, as we do each year, kind of without a lot of fanfare.
Dan, that brings up a term I've heard a lot in the industry, and I've been in the industry about 25 years, about reinsurance, you know, spreading risk. You know, one insurance company may not want to take all the risk, you know, in case that nuclear verdict hits. So there's reinsurance. Hey, for me and for the listeners, can you kind of explain what reinsurance is and how that impacts the markets?
Yeah, the reinsurance industry is a major component of the insurance industry and is kind of the man behind the curtain, if you will. Reinsurers or reinsurance companies are the insurance companies of the insurance companies. As you mentioned, no one insurance company keeps all the risk for all the claims for all the policies that they sell. In fact, most insurance companies don't keep all the risk for any line of business. So if you're a small trucker and you buy $1 million auto liability policy on your truck or 2 or 3 trucks, the insurance company you purchased it from may only keep, let's say, the first $500,000 of any one claim, and they will sell off that next $500,000 to a reinsurance company. Or they might pool all of their claims together, and once all the claims for all of their motor carriers hit a certain limit, they might reinsure away the rest of the claims. So these reinsurance companies play an incredibly important role in the financial stability of the smaller insurance companies and really allow those smaller insurance companies to offer capacity to the transportation industry. That said, that cost of reinsurance, so your trucking insurance company's cost of reinsurance goes into their total cost. And when their reinsurance cost goes up, which generally happens, reinsurance renewal dates are July 1 or January 1 normally. So when that insurance company's insurance cost goes up, that cost then gets passed down to all of their insureds. So when reinsurance costs are rising dramatically, which they are right now, the cost of insurance for each trucking company goes up.
Can you summarize what, I know there's other factors. You just mentioned one, Dan, that's causing insurance rates to rise, but can you summarize why insurance costs for the trucking sector seem to continue to rise?
Yeah, well, you hit on one of them, and that is that claims of all sizes are getting bigger. It wasn't a claim that might have been, $10,000 just 3 or 4 years ago, what we call a nuisance claim or a small property damage claim or even a small bodily injury claim involving really just medical bills. That claim today can easily be $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. And so when you add up lots of small and mid-sized claims, now being mid-sized and large claims, and you throw that in an environment with the nuclear verdict, the more of these really big claims, it just creates this tremendous added cost. You're also seeing, what used to be favorable jurisdictions. I mean, you're in Texas, and North Texas used to be a pretty good place to run a mile from an insurance standpoint. We've seen those jurisdictions that used to be favorable, take a Georgia, take a Texas, now we're terrible to do business in from an insurance standpoint. And then I would say the other thing you got to look at is the rules of the game. We've seen the plaintiffs' bar have a lot of success in getting statutes, legislation, case law slowly over time modified where it really becomes more difficult to defend ourselves and where, they're able to largely ignore the facts of the case and just paint the industry or paint the motor carrier in a particularly negative light. And because of that preferred position, if you will, the insurance industry that insures auto liability, to include trucks, has lost money every year since 2010. And so as a result, the industry is needing to get more rate. We're seeing less capacity or less competitors offering the coverage. And so it's created quite the dynamic situation.
Well, Dan, I've heard the term tort reform. That's something that's been talked about here in Texas. And you being an expert, and, hey, I personally don't understand it, and I know a lot of our listeners probably don't. So really 2 questions. If you kind of summarize what tort reform is all about, and then also as chairman of the American Trucking Association's Tort Reform Advisory Council, how do you think about tort reform strategy and how it could be positioned to impact the trucking industry in a positive way?
Sure. Well, let's just take tort first. And I'm glad you asked that because I really prefer the title litigation reform. A tort is a wrong harmed upon another, where somebody did something that hurt someone else and caused damage to their property or bodily injury or cost them money. And in the U.S., we really have 2 types of court-related activity. We have We have criminal actions, which of course are not torts. And we have torts where you're able to sue somebody for that harm you caused. And so tort reform is the larger concept of modifying the rules by which someone can sue someone else. If we think more broadly as litigation reform, then it kind of brings in the entire concept of having fair and knowledgeable judges, of adjusting the legislation and the laws to create equal and even playing field for adjudicating disputes. It's really the larger application. Tort is generally also a federal concept where you're focused on changing the laws at the federal level, where litigation reform, a lot of that fights on the ground at the state level.
Dan, that was a great explanation. I know there's several industry associations, such as the American Trucking Association, that have stated legal and tort reform initiatives. Can you share? I know you're in tune to everything going on at the federal level. Can you state kind of what their positions are and what they're working on?
Sure. The short of it is the current legal and social environment just isn't sustainable. It's adversely and unfairly driving outcomes that are hurting the transportation industry today and will ultimately hurt our economy and individual consumers directly. So improving the situation is just absolutely critical as a country. But it's going to be hard to do. Fortunately, we're in trucking and hard is, what we do every day. And ATA, fortunately, has stepped forward and provided some leadership in this regard. I'm not sure if you're aware, but in 2019, ATA made litigation reform a tier 1 priority for the association and developed a strategy around really 5 pillars. So the first is advocacy. So while we're advocating for tort reform at the federal level, there are very specific strategies for legislative reform at the state level. And state associations and their members are grassroots, boots on the ground in that regard. The second pillar, and I will argue at least as important, is image. And with regard to image, drivers are key. What America knows about trucking companies is what they know about our drivers on the road every day. And how the drivers carry the message and carry the image of the industry forward is critical. We've gotten some lift right now with COVID-19 where the general public sees in hard times the important work that drivers are doing every day. And as packages get dropped at our doorsteps, are reminded that drivers are family members too. They're members of our community. They're doing a hard job during a difficult period. And I think we can't do enough as an industry to focus on the image of our drivers while working the other pillars of research, communication, and development.
Man, that's good stuff. Image, you mentioned image, in the movies, truckers are depicted as, wildcatters, having that picture of that long-nosed Peterbilt with Jaws coming in your rearview mirror, but that's really not the case at all. I mean, I'm around professional drivers all the time, and some of the most genuine, open, willing to do anything. I've been involved, Dan, with some truckers that have donated space during hurricanes here in Texas and Louisiana to take truckloads of food and other items, and it really what keeps America moving, and we've seen it even more so during COVID, how important our industry is. And man, I just want to take a minute to salute the professional drivers out there. You or I would not be sitting in our chairs right now if it wasn't for the professional driver, and I've never forgotten that.
That's the absolute truth. And it frustrates me to no end. I've been in and around this business for a long time, and I get to see some of what's happening in different pockets around the country. I mean, think about Louisiana right now, and the racketeering charges that have been filed against now, over 30 individuals that were staging accidents, that were swiping into or stopping in front of truck drivers just trying to make a living, trying to get home. And now we're starting to peel the onion. You've got the federal government involved in investigating this. And last number I saw was there's been over 32 people just with that one racket indicted on federal charges. And it makes me sick to think about that truck driver who is doing the right thing, simply providing for society, working to provide for their family, trying to get their work done and get back home, and gets pulled into that mess. And I'll tell you, John, I also, even to a degree, have a little bit of empathy for that person that put themselves in harm's way for very little money, very little reward, and swerved into that truck and had unnecessary surgeries.
Put their life at risk, yeah.
Yeah, they didn't plan that. Who planned it is a group of plaintiffs' attorneys, unfortunately with the support of some medical providers. So finally, last week, for the first time, one of the attorneys that organized that nonsense was indicted on federal charges. And I think we're going to see that's just the tip of the iceberg. You're going to see a bunch of other plaintiffs' attorneys finally called to account for that crap that they've been pulling.
You listeners can't see us, but we've got a video feed going. And I just gave Dan a big fist bump right there, doing the right thing. And that's just, like you said, scratching the surface. What all's going on in other parts of the country? And that's a good segue, Dan. The American Trucking Association does a lot of great things at the national level, but it really boils down to the state level. Here in Texas, very strong trucking association. Down in Florida, where you are, I know you mentioned Louisiana. Louisiana has a strong association, and that's really what gets things done on the state level. What are some of the things on the horizon at the state level across the country?
Well, I think what we're going to see is continuing to build on some of the recent successes. You mentioned Louisiana. Not only are they going after the plaintiffs' bar with these false claims, but they actually passed last year the Civil Justice Reform Act of 2020. And within that, there were several items of tort reform, if you will, that are going to allow motor carriers to defend their drivers. So one of the issues that was built into that law is it decreased the threshold to request a jury trial from $50,000 down to $10,000. That's important because these plaintiff bars knew that the defense didn't have that option to hold them to account. It also repealed the seatbelt gag rule. There are 26 states in this country where the defense attorney cannot introduce into evidence the fact that the injured party in that car wasn't wearing their seatbelt and contributed by not wearing their seatbelt to their own degree of injury. So that got repealed in Louisiana. And then lastly, they're part of the cost. You asked, why are insurance costs going up so much? And there's this concept of phantom damages. It's where the injured party gets to sue for the gross amount of their medical bills or other bills, not how much they actually paid. You might get a medical bill from your doctor for $1,000, but then your insurance company adjusts it down to $300, and you might end up paying $280. Well, these plaintiffs around the country are asking for the $1,000, even though that's not what they paid to the medical provider. And in many states, like Louisiana until this law, they get $1,000. And so we saw that type of relief, that very issue addressed in Louisiana last year, but also in legislation in Iowa. We saw punitive damage legislation pass in Missouri. And so you're going to see model legislation developed as part of the ATA's toolbox, passed around the states that can take what they learned in a state like Iowa or in Louisiana and add it to their legislative session, where they're able to go to their state and say, if it's not fair that we can't introduce that injured driver wasn't wearing a seatbelt in Louisiana, it shouldn't be fair that we can't introduce that in Florida. And so we're going to follow what we learned.
Dan, small fleets are, they see this on the news, they hear about it, they read about it in the paper, and they're more and more concerned about the cost of insurance continue to escalate, and insurance will become more difficult. You mentioned a hard market, be difficult to even procure and purchase insurance coverage. The mantra, what we hear a lot is whether it's health coverage or liability coverage, will we be paying more to get less? Is that accurate?
I'd say in part, yes. But it's affecting the big fleets in a different way than the small fleets. So let me answer it in the big fleet way first, just to help you understand. There's such a reduction in capacity right now, meaning less insurance companies wanting to offer coverage to trucking companies, or if they offer coverage, wanting to offer a small limit. That big fleets that go out to try to renew their insurance, those fleets that carry big excess coverage or umbrellas, are having a hard time even getting the amount of insurance they want to purchase because there's not enough insurance to go around to all the fleets. So we're seeing companies really truly get less protection on the high end. The other thing that's happening a lot is insurance companies are raising deductibles. So there's a lot of small fleets that maybe didn't have a deductible in the past or had a very low deductible that they could find a way to pay out of their earnings. And they're finding pressure now to increase those deductibles. So to a degree, it's a double whammy. The rates are creeping up, and at the same time, the insurance industry is pushing more risk to the motor carrier, which means more out-of-pocket cost.
Dan, I read recently that low-risk motor carriers, very safe, great safety ratings, leveraging technology to the fullest to reduce accidents, are experiencing 8 to 10% rate increases, where new carriers and those with average to marginal safety records are seeing increases in the range from 30 to 40%. Does that sound right?
Unfortunately, I think those are fair generalizations, but the range of outcomes is far greater. The absolute best fleets, the established, long-term, consistent fleets, have a chance to occasionally do better. But for fleets that are carrying high limits of excess where the capacity is so limited, it can be worse. And if you look at, I can give you a statistic. From 2010 to 2018, we saw the average cost of truck insurance increase from 55 cents a mile to 85 cents a mile. And you think about that same time frame, during that period that the rate per mile being charged went from 55 to 85 cents, the insurance industry lost money every single year at an average rate of about 11 cents for every dollar of premium collected. So $1.11 in claims paid out for every dollar in premium collected over that duration. So when you've got that dynamic, it's not hard to understand how we're going to see continued rate increases for a little while.
Yeah, it doesn't take a mathematician to figure that out. It's just losses keep mounting up, and there has to be an adjustment. Well, what will it take for the hard insurance market to end and rates to stabilize?
Just generally speaking, we need capacity to increase, or there needs to be added interest in writing the business auto and the excess lines of coverage. And that will come as a result of profitability or perceived profit for doing that. The insurance companies are businesses too. And if they can't make money in an area of their business, I remember back during the medical malpractice crisis in the early 90s, when I started my career, I was underwriting, in addition to truck, med mal for the largest writer of medical malpractice in the United States, St. Paul Travelers. And by the mid-90s, it got so bad, doctors were getting sued so freely and for such large amounts that St. Paul completely exited that coverage. The largest writer of medical malpractice in the U.S. just quit writing medical malpractice altogether. And as a result, we got tort reform in the medical area. So, we're going to have to see insurance companies want to do this business. Or until it gets better and we get an element of tort reform, the nuclear verdicts get under control, they're going to put their capital elsewhere. So the first issue is we got to see underwriters have to have a perception of what they call rate adequacy, that they're getting enough money for their product. Second, capital markets have to view insurance companies as a great place to invest again. And then third, I think we're going to need to see new sources of capital. And I will tell you, I'm seeing private equity investments. I'm seeing non-traditional sources of money start to put some money back into the insurance industry. And last and probably most important, from a sustainability standpoint, we have got to get litigation reform in this country.
Hey, great stuff, man. This has been awesome. Hopefully you got time for maybe two more questions, Dan. What are the top 3 or 4 things a small trucking company can do to prepare for a bad accident and avoid becoming part of that nuclear verdict we talked about at the beginning of this segment?
Well, I'll tell you, they pick on the plaintiff's attorneys are going to pick on a small trucking company, and that driver, no differently, they're going to pick on a big trucking company. And so as I advise big trucking companies, and what they have the benefit of being able to do is they prepare for that bad accident before it occurs. And a small trucking company can do that. Make sure that your paperwork's in order. Talk to somebody who's been through it before and ask, how'd you handle it? What did I, as the driver of my truck, or what does my 1, 2, 3 other drivers need to do and not do? Who can we talk to and who can't we talk to? Can we take pictures or should we not take pictures? Can we write stuff down or should we not write stuff down? What do we say to the investigating officer? You have to be prepared and know what to do before the accident. The other thing that they often focus upon is documentation. And I know it's hard to keep up on the paperwork. It's hard to keep up on the training. Documentation is tough for small fleets. But failure to have preventive maintenance, the pre-trip documented, those items will always come back to haunt you when it comes to a large event.
Well, Dan, I don't know about you, I didn't grow up thinking I was going to get in the trucking industry, but man, I think there's a statistic like 1 in 6 people here in the U.S. work in transportation related, whether it's warehouse and logistics, trucking, maintenance. And I got in the business back in the mid 90s in operations, but I've always had an affinity towards technology. And I've spent most of my career in the technology sector for trucking. So let's shift gears a bit. What role do you think technology will play in trucking in the future, particularly as it relates to insurance risk?
I think you're going to see, and I think small fleets are going to be the first perhaps to even benefit from tremendous amount of involvement of technology intertwined between transportation and insurance. Let me throw a few names out at you. Think in your mind, who makes up the trucking industry? Who are the players in the transportation industry? And then let me throw out a few names at you. Alphabet, Google, Nikola, Tesla, Uber, Waymo, Microsoft. What do those companies have in common? They don't drive trucks. They're technology companies. And they are permeating all aspects of the tractor, of the trailer, of the driver's work environment. They are interchanging data with FMCSA, all the state DOTs. They are starting to aggregate more and more data about the fleets. And so we're seeing this drive towards data, modernization of the fleet, in-cab technology, onboard accident avoidance, cameras. We're using artificial intelligence for filtering and decision-making. And so if you think about that from the context of insurance, the insurance industry is starting to use that data to do stuff, to pick risk, to design new products in different ways of offering insurance, pricing insurance, determining rating basis, coverage terms. It's not unusual. It will not be unusual a few years from now where the rates that a small trucking company pays vary and maybe vary daily based upon the data that's being provided to the insurance company from the truck, from the weather station, from the traffic control devices along the roadway. We are going to see a complete integration of technology into the insurance industry would be my projection.
Wow. Big data. Yeah, man, you are so spot on. Just having so much information out there to be able to draw risk from. And really at the end of the day, Dan, to help that professional driver be safer and that fleet be safer and avoid accidents is going to be so important. Since I'm a technology guy, I've got a deposit on a Tesla Cybertruck myself. I mean, nice. I didn't really like the look of it, but once I started researching a little bit, I'm like, man, part of it is safety, that exoskeletal steel cage that, I'm worried about someone else hitting me, right? A distracted driver. So I'm buying into the technology myself. And
from an insurance standpoint, John, I really think there's a chance for the professional truck driver to get charged a fairer premium, and perhaps even based on how they drive, where they drive, when they drive, what they're driving, for professional truck drivers to reduce their insurance costs in that new environment.
Certainly. Well, hey, Dan Cook from the True North Companies, man, that has been such a great segment here on the road home. Thank you for being a part of this one.
Thanks, John. Glad to be here.